Right now, I want to draft a shift dress on paper. Note that you can do this on your fabric because we won't be making use of that. I've gone ahead to label my center front, which is the middle of the front. And right now I'm marking the startup line at the top edge of my paper. This will be a reference point for all my vertical measurements. This done, the next thing I'll be doing is to mark my shoulder length. I'll be dividing my shoulder length into two. That's 15 inches for me divided into two, 7.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 7.5 inches on my startup line. So next we'll be taking the neckline. Standard neckline is 3 inches by 3 inches for the front. So I'm just marking that on my paper. So next, because the shoulder is not exactly straight, we'll be creating a shoulder drop at the dots we created there. So we'll be dropping the shoulder by 1 inch and we'll connect that to the neckline. Now I've decided to modify my neckline a little bit to make it a bit wider. So I'll be taking 4 inches by 4 inches for this particular dress. So like I said earlier, the standard is 3 inches by 3 inches, but you're free to modify that into any shape and to change the type of neckline you're creating. Now I want to take all my vertical measurements and I'm marking my half length, that's my shoulder to waist, and from the shoulder to the hip line a standard of 9 inches, and that's what I'm taking here. So we won't be making use of the bust points or the under bust simply because we are not creating that. So next I'll mark the length of my gown. So the length of my gown in this case is 40 inches and I'm just marking that on my paper. Once I'm done marking my hemline, I'll be going through all the vertical measurements on another point on the paper just so I can create dots and connect the dots to make straight horizontal lines on my paper. There we go. I'll mark my half length once again at 17 inches. And from my waist to my hip line, 9-inch difference, and then my hemline. So I'll connect these dots together to create straight horizontal lines. Now I'm labeling the lines created. This is my waistline. And that is my hip line. And then we have the hemline below. So now let's work on our armhole. So there are two methods you can use to locate the position of your chest line. Either you take your shoulder length, that's your shoulder length divided by 2, and mark it below the shoulder drop, or you divide your bust circumference into 6 and add 1.5 inches. Then you take the measurement from the shoulder drop as well. So these two values may not be equal, but they both work. So now I'm drawing another straight line. That is my chest line. So right now I need to connect my shoulder drop to my chest line, and that's by taking my shoulder length at the chest line. So I'm taking 7.5 inches here. So I'll mark and then draw a straight line connecting the shoulder drop to the chest line. So at the midpoint of this new line, for the front pattern, you come in by half an inch. Now we won't do this for the back when we're working on the back. Now we are connecting our shoulder drop through the half-inch mark to the chest line. That way we have created our armhole curve, and this part will house our sleeve eventually. Having done that, now we need to take all our circumferences divided by 4. That's because we are working on 1/4 of the body. That's a half of our front pattern. So that means dividing the bust circumference into 4. So in my case, I have a bust circumference of 40 inches. So I divided it by 4 and I marked 10 inches. At the waistline, you mark your waist circumference divided by 4. So, but because we are creating a shift dress, there's a need to add a little bit of ease to this. So I've decided to add 1 extra inch to my measurement, and that's what I'm just adding to my bust and to my waist. I'll do the same to the hip. So you can add between 5 half inch to 1 inch to give your blouse or your gown a kind of freedom. So I'm marking the hip 42 inches. When divided into 4, I had 10.25, 10 1/4, and I added extra 1 inch to that. So I'm taking exactly that at the hemline. That's because I don't want my shift dress shapy. I just want it straight from the hip. So if you want it a little bit shapy, you can come in by 1 inches or 2 inches, so you won't have exactly what you have on your hip. So now I'm connecting the dots. You can make use of your curve or just use your freehand like I'm doing here, and make sure you have a smooth curve onto the hip, and then we have it straight from the hip to the hemline. The next thing I'll be doing now is to add my sewing allowance. So I'll be adding half inch around my neckline, half inch at the shoulder, half inch at the armhole, and 1 inch sewing allowance at the sides of my shift dress. Lastly, on my front pattern, I'll be adding 2 inches hemming allowance. So these 2 inches I will eventually fold in when sewing. So you can make use of 1 inch depending on how thick you want your fold to be. So I've decided to work with 2 inches. So right now I'll just cut out my front pattern and we'll move on to cutting the back. Here is the paper we'll be using to draft our back pattern, and once again we'll be working on half of the back. It will be very similar to what we have created for the front with some slight modifications. So I'll be using the front as a pattern to cut out the back. But then one of the things you must note is the back has a division for the zip. So the center front will be on fold, but the center back will be opened. So because of the zip, we need an extra 1 inch allowance, which we usually call the zip allowance. And that's what I'm labeling zip allowance, 1 inch. And another modification we'll be making is on the neckline. The standard neckline measurement should be 3 inches by 1 inch, but remember I modified my front neckline to be 4 inches wide, so my back neckline will be 4 inches wide and 1 inch deep. That's my back neckline curve, so it curves into the zip allowance at the center back. The next modification we'll be making is at the armhole. Remember I told you that we don't move in by half an inch like we did for the front armhole, so I'll just mark a straight line there and curve it just the way you're seeing in the video. So now I'll just go ahead and cut out my back pattern. With all our allowances added already on paper, when we are doing this on fabric, all we have to do is cut exactly what we have on paper. Right now I'm cutting through my center back, thereby opening up the zip allowance, and that's all for the back. So we have our front and back in place. Next we'll be drafting our sleeve, and I want to teach you a very simple method of making sleeve. So I've placed my paper and I'm labeling my center, that's the center of my sleeve, which will be on fold. Next, you create a startup line and measure your cap height from your startup line. So I took out 5 inches here, which works for sizes between 8 to 12, UK size 8 to 12. And next you mark the midpoint of your cap height and rule that out as well. So if you have someone above size 12, you may need to add, let's say size 14, you may need to add another ½ inch, and to your cap height. Size 16, add 1 inch, and so on and so forth. There's actually a standard chart for cap height where you don't have to calculate, and you just take out your chart and rule out the cap height for individuals. So next, on this new line you created, you measure 4 inches to the side. Now you're going to connect the top of your sleeve through the dot created on the second line onto the third line. So on the third line, what you will measure out is your bicep circumference. That's the circumference on the upper part of your arm. Right now I'm marking my sleeve length. That's I took out 9 inches and I added extra 2 inches for sewing. That's the hemming allowance of the sleeve. So that's what I'm just marking out. Now I'm marking out my bicep circumference divided by 2. So I added a little bit of ease of ½ an inch. So now I'm taking out the circumference just above my elbow, because my sleeve is a short sleeve and it goes a little bit above the elbow. So I marked out about 6 inches and added a little bit of ease because I want my sleeve to be free. So I've ruled that out, and now I'll take my pattern curve to connect the top of my sleeve to the line where I took my bicep circumference. Now we have that smooth S-shape curve. So before you go on with this, you need to assess your armhole curve, compare the length of your armhole curve to the length of this S shape you have created for your sleeve. So you need to be sure they fit properly into each other. So mine was around 10 1/4 of an inch, and I measured that out on my fabric just to be sure I have the right measurement and I won't need any adjustment. And that's it. If the curve I had created was shorter than what I had on my armhole, I would have had to adjust my cap height and make it a little bit lower, and vice versa. So right now I just readjusted my allowance, my hemming allowance at the edge of my sleeve, and I'll cut this out on paper and go ahead to cut it on my fabric. Don't forget that on your sleeve, at the sides of your sleeve, you must have added your sewing allowance of 1 inch. So I did that, and also 1/2 inch round the curve to sew in my sleeve on the main clothes. While cutting out my sleeve, because on the pattern I have all my allowances in place, I've added the hemming allowance, I've added the sewing allowance on the side and at the top of my sleeve. So I would just need to cut exactly what I have on paper. So right now, we'll be creating a facing for both the front and the back of our dress. And all you need to do is place your neckline on another fabric. That's the fabric you want to use as your facing. So I've placed my neckline. I'll trace out the neckline using a chalk and the shoulder. So that is done. So note that my facing for the front didn't get to the edge of the shoulder. So I just want to create something round as my facing. Now you can see how the facing fits right into the front neckline. That's the idea. Right now we'll move on to doing same with our back piece. So just place the back on another fabric, trace out the neckline and create our facing. But this time I'll be working with a straight edge facing. I won't be creating that curve I did with the front. Another thing to note with the back facing is that I allowed the facing get to the shoulder and even extend to the armhole, because we'll be using this facing to turn our shoulder. That's why this step is important. Now I'm done cutting the facing and I'll slash through the center back of the facing so I can attach each piece to each part of our back piece. So now we'll create a pocket for our dress, and that's the last part of the cutting of a shift dress. And I'm just using the freehand method. Place your palm on your fabric and make a rounded shape as seen here. One side extending a bit longer than the other side. Then go ahead and cut the pocket. Now you need 2 pairs of pockets for each side. So we're going to attach 4 in total. That's 2 for the left, 2 for the right. And that's it. We're done. We have all the pieces we need to make our shift dress. All we need to do is to put each piece together and create a beautiful dress. We have a back, two sides for the back with facing. We have a front with facing. We have our sleeves and our pocket. So that's all for now. Please join me in the sewing video coming soon. Thank you.